Hey, this is Jamie from Stonemaier Games, and today I'm going to rank my top 10 favorite games of all time as of right now. It is roughly, well, I'm filming this in August, but this is the September 2022 video. I have a few rules for how I select these games. One is I've kept track of all the games that I've ranked on any of my videos for any mechanism or theme or these all-time favorite games for a certain year, all sorts of videos, top 10 videos over the last 5 or 6 years, maybe 7 years at this point. And I have a running list of all the games that have filled the number 1 or number 2 slots on those lists. I compile that up, and any game that appears at least 3 times as number 1 or number 2 on any of those lists is eligible for my top 10 list of all time. That's just some way of me filtering this list down to a reasonable number of games. Also, I don't count Stonemaier Games on this list. There are some top 10 lists where I do let Stonemaier Games appear on that list, but I am the publisher and the lead designer at Stonemaier Games, and for this list, I just want it to be completely unbiased. Our games would appear on this list, of course, because I love our games, but they're not going to appear on this list. However, if you like these games, I would highly recommend that you check out other games from Stonemaier Games because they are all influenced by me. Yeah. Okay, also, I asked Stonemaier, well, I guess the first part of this list is I asked Stonemaier ambassadors, volunteers who help out with Stonemaier-related stuff, to pick their top 10, or no, their number 1 favorite game as of right now, and any game that appeared at least twice from multiple ambassadors are on the following list. Ark Nova, Creature Comforts, which is a relatively new game. I need to try Creature Comforts. I was surprised and intrigued to see that it show up twice. Dead Reckoning, Dune Imperium, Everdell, Gloomhaven, My Father's Work, another very new game that I haven't tried that appeared, I think, twice on the Ambassador Picks list. Oath, Paladins of the West Kingdom, Praga, Caput, Regni, Root, Scythe, Tapestry, Terra Mystica, Terraforming Mars, Trickerion, Twilight Imperium, and Wingspan. Obviously, a few of those were Stonemaier Games, but those were the ambassador picks, not my own picks. Now, of my list that I narrowed down to games that appeared at least 3 times, there were a couple games that didn't make the top 10, but they appeared on that list, so I have loved them over the years a number of times. And so those games are, and so not in the top 10 this year, just the honorable mentions are Seven Wonders Duel, Azul Summer Pavilion, Castles of Mad King Ludwig, Fantasy Realms, Hanamikoji, Just One, Lords of Waterdeep, Mysterium Park, On Tour, Parks, Patchwork, Scotland Yard, Shards of Infinity, Sleeping Gods, The Crew, The Mind, and Time Stories. As always, all of this information is in the description if you want to go back and look at these favorite games. And now, let me jump into my top 10 favorite games of all time as of right now. At number 10, I have Magic: The Gathering. Magic is a game that has appeared on this list a number of times. If you're not familiar with it, it is a collectible card game. I like to play in a non-collectible format. I like to, whenever a new set comes out, I like to buy 6 draft sets, so 18 draft boosters. I invite over some friends. Megan joins in if she's in the mood, and we play a draft where we play each other player in the draft 1 time. So you get to see every other deck at the table for a game, not a whole match, just a game. It usually takes 3 or 4 hours, so it's still a considerable amount of time. But I love drafting. I love the excitement of getting a new, of opening a pack or getting a new hand of cards and deciding which one you want to pick, and then building your deck out of that, and then getting to use that deck right away against a variety of other decks. I love that format in Magic: The Gathering. It's definitely my favorite format to play. I need to play. I haven't played Commander. I haven't played Cube. I haven't played those formats. I used to play Constructed, which is when you build a deck and then out of whatever cards you have. But now I really love that draft format. It's hard to pick a favorite mechanism for Magic because there are so many mechanisms in the game. There are the core mechanisms, the core flow of the game, where you're playing some cards, you are attacking often, and then you're playing some more cards if you want. There are surprises that emerge from the game. You hold back certain cards, you're bluffing, you're playing instants at unexpected times. But I guess I'll mention a few of my favorite keywords here. I do have a top 10 list of these keywords. But I think I'll mention my favorite that I think I'd love to use in another game someday if I have cards that have costs to play them, and that is the suspend mechanism. I really love suspend. Suspend is a mechanism where there are cards with either no cost to play them. I think some of them had no cost. Most of them had a really high cost to play them for a big creature, a big spell. And you can pay that cost, so you can play the card as normal. Or you can suspend the card, usually paying a very low cost, like 1 mana, pay that 1 mana cost. And you set that card aside with some tokens on it. And every turn, you remove one of those tokens. And when you remove the last token, the card automatically enters play. I love passive benefits like this. My game Viticulture has passive benefits with the winemaking process, where just by waiting to do something, the thing that you're waiting on gets more and more powerful. And Suspend has that effect. I'd love to use Suspend in a game someday because I think it's such a clever mechanism. So Magic the Gathering, number 10 on this list. Great game. I look forward to drafting the new Dominaria set, which comes out in a month or so. And number 9 on the list is my favorite auction game, and that is Ra. Ra has appeared at various times on this list at various peaks and heights, and it's a little bit lower on this year's list, or this half year's list, because I recently played Priest of Ra, and I really enjoyed Priest of Ra, which is essentially a sequel to Ra. But Priest of Ra does something a little bit different. In the core game of Ra, on your turn, usually you are drawing a tile out of the bag and putting that tile on the auction block. And every now and then, you can either, instead of drawing a tile, or when you draw a tile, you draw a Ra tile, an auction starts, and each player has one chance to bid using one of their 3 auction tiles. There's no money in the game. You have these auction tiles that you use to bid. It keeps the auction really nice and tight, only 1 bid per player. And some of the tiles that come out are bad, so they can... you're bidding for all the tiles that are out there. That's a key part of Ra. You're bidding for all the tiles that are in the tile row at that time, not just one tile. Bidding for all of them. So sometimes, most of those tiles are going to be good. Sometimes there's some negative tiles in there. Sometimes the value of the auction changes. It's not always better to add more tiles to that auction row. And the round can end unexpectedly because when a certain number of Ra tiles have come out, the round instantly ends, even if you haven't used all your bids to win auctions. But Priest of Ra did something a little twist to that formula that I thought was really clever, where when you're drawing a tile out of the bag, many of the tiles are double-sided. So instead of having the choice on your turn simply be to draw a tile, the choice is draw a tile and then which side you place it face up or face down on the auction row, depending on whether or not you think you might win that auction later and you might want that tile, or you don't want that type of tile and so you want to put a tile face that you don't want in the auction row. I think that's a really interesting decision point. It isn't in Ra, and I think that's why Ra appeared a little bit lower on this month's list, because I really like that, and it is in Ra. I'm curious what 25th Century Games does with their new version of Ra that I did back on GameFound. I'm excited to own it. And I don't think I'll really miss that mechanism all that much if they don't include it, but I think it is a clever touch, and I think it pushed Ra a little bit lower on this list. So Ra, number 9, my favorite auction game, and my number 9 favorite game as of right now. I'm always happy to play Ra. Number 8 on the list is Isle of Cats. I currently do own Isle of Cats. So Isle of Cats is a card drafting polyomino tile placement game set in a fictional world that the City of Games has created. You are using fish resources to acquire cat tokens that are in a variety of polyomino shapes, and you're placing them on your boat to complete different goals. Some of the goals are making big cat families where cats of the same color are touching each other. Some of the goals are drafted, so you're drafting certain private goals that say, like, you gain 7 points if you have at least 10 fish at the end of the game, or they're related to the tiles that you have in play. Some of the goals are public goals, so you might draft a goal and then everyone has the ability to complete that goal. And there are also little goals just built into your boat, where you're trying to complete rooms, you're trying to cover up rats, things like that. So lots of little mini games involved with the polyomino puzzle, added to the card drafting, which is where every round you're going to draft a hand of cards, and then decide which of those cards you actually want to keep. Because similar to Terraforming Mars, you have to pay a cost to keep the cards that you want to have later in the game, whether you play them right away or play them later. All these mechanisms I love. I think all these are really, really clever mechanisms. The draft is fun. The idea that you have to pay for the cards, I wouldn't say it's fun, but I think it's a clever mechanism. And the polyominoes and the little puzzles within, I think that's great. And I love the game. The theme. The theme is fun and whimsical. I love cats in games. And it comes together really, really well. Also, it's one of my favorite games. I think it appeared on this list of there's certain games where you get a bunch of resources every round, a huge influx of resources. And the length of your round is essentially determined by how you spend those resources. Another game like this is Clans of Caledonia, where you get a bunch of money every round, and all you're doing throughout the round is spending that money. Like, that's your action system. And Isle of Cats has a very similar action system where you get a bunch of fish every round, and you decide how you want to spend that fish. And when you're done spending fish for the round, typically your round is done. It's tied to a few other elements here, but I love that mechanism in games. It just feels good to get a bunch of stuff and be like, oh, how am I going to spend all this? And then you do that over the course of the round. So that's Isle of Cats at number 8 on my favorite list right now. At number 7 is Russian Railroads. Russian Railroads is an engine building game combined with worker placement. So you're placing workers to not draft, but to gain certain, I would say kind of resources, kind of tiles, to gain different benefits. And you add those benefits to the 4 different railroads, or one of the 4 different railroads that you are currently working on. And each of the railroads, depending on how far you progressed on it, can trigger one-time or ongoing benefits. Usually points are the ongoing benefits. So the one-time benefits are often unlocking a new level, a gate that was there before you. It unlocks this new thing. So it unlocks a new type of train that you can put on your tracks, and that type of unlocking system. And it is just, it's a really satisfying game of progression. It inspired Tapestry to a certain extent, because in the early rounds, or at least the first round of Russian Railroads, you don't do a lot and you don't gain a lot of points. But by the final round, you're doing all these things. You have a bunch of workers probably. You are gaining a ton of points. You've moved up on certain tracks. Maybe you've even completed a track or two. It feels really, really good to do that by the end of the game. If you like Russian Railroads, I definitely think you'll like Tapestry and vice versa. I have found that my favorite way to play Russian Railroads, although I'm happy to play on the tabletop, it has a great table presence, but I think the board game arena version is really, really good because it tells you, it shows you how far you can advance on each of the tracks. It shows you how many points you're scheduled to get each round. And it takes away the math side of the game, because there is a bit of math in calculating how many points you're going to get for doing different things throughout the round. So I do like the board game arena version, but I would gladly still play Russian Railroads on the tabletop. That's Russian Railroads at number 7 on my list. At number 6 is another game that I own, and still has one of the mechanisms that I think has maybe been repeated only once or twice over the years, and that is Tzolk'in. Tzolk'in has a series of gears that you place workers on, and every round, those gears, all the gears turn forward 1 notch. And so your workers increase in value, or the benefits that they will gain increases in value as those wheels turn. Again, it comes back to those passive benefits that I mentioned for the suspend mechanism in Magic the Gathering. That passive benefit of just putting a worker down and then not worrying about that worker for a while. Just let them get better and better at what they're doing on that wheel, and then pull them off at the right time. Because on your turn, you're either placing workers or you're pulling off any number of your workers from these wheels. Each of the wheels has a different theme to it. So on one wheel, you're cutting down the forest, you're gathering corn. Another wheel, you're gathering second level resources that you can use to then on another wheel to either upgrade your ability to do things or gain tiles that give you strong one-time or ongoing benefits. There's a crystal skull track that essentially just gives you points and moves you up these cult tracks. And then there's a kind of a wild card wheel that does a bunch of different things. It's a game about timing. Time is definitely a resource in this game. How you use time, how you leverage time, the order in which you do things matters. I love order of operations in games. And it's a really, really satisfying game to play. It's one of my favorite engine building games because there's so many different ways to improve what you're doing throughout the game. And even just by not doing anything, like I said, just by putting a worker on a wheel, that worker is going to get better and better as the game moves forward. I love Tzolk'in. I keep returning to it over the years. And I do play with the expansion sometime. There's at least one pretty robust expansion that adds asymmetry and then some other mechanisms. I love the core game enough that I don't ever feel the need to play with the expansion. I think I do have it in the box. And every now and then I'll play with the asymmetric abilities, which I think are fun. That's the main part of the expansion that I play with. Tzolk'in, my number 6 favorite game right now. At number 5 is a game that I often associate with Tzolk'in because it came out at a similar time, and that is Terra Mystica. Terra Mystica is a game that I now primarily play on Board Game Arena, but a friend does have a fully decked out copy that we play from time to time. Terra Mystica is a game of, I guess the core feature of the game is the asymmetry. You have an asymmetric faction that is very different than the other asymmetric factions, and a big part of the game is playing to that faction's strengths and also deciding which order you want to build the buildings on that faction, because your player mat is covered with buildings. You are oftentimes on your turn constructing a building on a territory that you control or that you don't control, and if it is a territory that you already control, you're pulling off the building that was on there and putting it back on your mat. And anything that you pull off your mat reveals a benefit that you gain during the income phase. That's the engine building of the game, that you're exposing more and more things on your player mat so your income improves every round, which is very satisfying. This is one of the first games, other than maybe Hansa Teutonica, that had that element of pulling stuff off your player mat to expose ongoing powers and ongoing income benefits. It's something that I've used in multiple games at this point, and namely Tapestry and Scythe, because I really, really like that system of having your player mat itself get better and better over the course of the game. But the asymmetry, I think, is the core feature. That's what I love the most about Terra Mystica. It's what keeps me coming back to the game over and over again, to the point that I even designed a fan faction that I think is still being tested on Board Game Arena right now, and might appear in printed format someday. That's the Atlanteans faction for Terra Mystica. I usually play red in Terra Mystica because I really love the Chaos Magicians, and I also enjoy. I think my favorite mechanisms in the game are the ovals. So the favorite thing to do in the game are getting the oval power tiles, and the Chaos Magicians interact well with them, as do the Ice Princesses or Ice Maidens. I really like playing either of those factions. Let me know your favorite faction if you enjoy Terra Mystica in the comments below. It is my number 5 favorite game right now. I didn't pull over my number 4 box. I do have it on the shelf over there. Clank is my number 4 favorite game. It's a big box. I have the Acquisitions Incorporated Legacy Clank box over there filled with all of my Clank stuff. I have multiple expansions, tons of cards mixed together at this point. And it's a lot of stuff, but I love Clank. I love playing Clank. Clank is a game it's a deck building game where you are delving into a dungeon to gather treasure, to fight some monsters. The fights are really quick. It is not a game where you're doing a whole separate thing for combat. It's just part of the interface of the game, which I love. And you're gathering some secrets, minor and major secret tokens. You're spending your money to gain more little tiles, little ongoing benefits, and of course you're improving your deck throughout the game. You're buying a bunch of cards, acquiring a bunch of cards in your deck, and hopefully finding synergy there. I find that every game of Clank plays differently because of those different moving factors, the variable tokens, the variable cards that come out, and the order in which you decide to dive into the dungeon, even if it's the exact same dungeon that you played the last 3 or 4 times. And Clank is so high on this list, I think, because not only is the core game good, not only are the expansions good, but the Clank Legacy is also a wonderful, wonderful legacy game. It's one of my favorite legacy games where you're actually kind of building the map as you go. And very cleverly, they made the board double-sided. So not only are you building one side of the map, but every now and then you'll encounter a scenario that says, hey, you're playing on the back side of the board this time. You're building this side too, which is awesome. Awesome concept. So the whole world of Clank is one that I really love, and I'm very much looking forward to Clank Catacombs. I've pre-ordered it. This is a new version of Clank, a standalone version, where you build the map as you go using tiles. And so that's exciting to me, that you don't even get to see the whole map at the beginning of the game. I'm very excited to see how that plays out. So that is Clank at number 4 on my list. Number 3, by the same designer as Clank, definitely one of my favorite designers, Paul Denon Brennan, I always forget the last name, is Dune Imperium. Sorry, Paul, for always forgetting your last name. Dune Imperium is... Oh, and I do have Dune Imperium, of course. I have Dune Imperium and the expansion. I love the game with or without the expansion. It is another deck-building game where the cards that you play... On your turn, you're only playing one of those cards. So you play one card, and you use that card to indicate where you get to place a worker on the board. So there's a benefit on the card, and there's a benefit that you gain from where you place the worker. I love double benefits, double rewards in games. When you do one thing, but you gain 2 benefits from it. You can see this in a lot of my games that I've designed, including Scythe. But I love that you get this benefit from the card, and the card shows you where you get to place the worker, where you also get a benefit. I love that. Maybe that's the core feature that I'll mention. There's a lot of stuff I could talk about with Clank. In fact, I have a whole video where I dive very deep into the 10 favorite things that I love about Clank. Check out, or about Dune. Actually, I have one for Clank and Dune Imperium at this point. I have one for both. So I love that element. But also, if you don't play the card, at the end of the round, after you've used up all your workers, you lay out any remaining cards from your hand on the table, and at the bottom of those cards is a benefit that you gain at that point. Usually it's either skill, which you use to acquire more cards, or it is a combat resource that if you're engaged in combat, then you get to use that resource. And I like both of those mini games that emerge there. I like the combat mini game that happens at the end of each round. You don't always have to participate in it. You can choose when to do so, but I think that's a lot of fun. It's very streamlined. But I also like that you're only buying cards typically at the end of the round using your skill, or during a past turn, essentially. It's not exactly the end of the round, but during your past turn. So I like that every card you gain has a pretty big impact on your game. You're not gaining 2 or 3 cards every turn like you do in many deck building games. Even in Clank, you're often gaining multiple cards per turn. In this game, you're only gaining a few cards over the course of the game, and those cards have a big impact on your deck. So I really like that aspect of Dune Imperium. I love the game. I think it was number 1 on my list the last time I was playing it. A few other games have inched above it, but I still love it. I truly love Dune Imperium, and I would recommend it to anyone who loves worker placement or deck building. And I wasn't into the Doom world or theme or fiction before I played the game. I played the game and I was like, I want to know more. This game has intrigued me to learn more, and I went out and read the first book right away and really enjoyed it, and then watched the movie a couple times at this point. Love the movie. The new movie. I haven't watched the original movie. But yeah, Dune Imperium, number 3 on my favorites list right now. Number 2 on the list is a game that I've loved for a long time, and I just realized that this game just brings me so much joy. I'm always excited to play it when it's an option to play, and that is the Quacks of Quedlinburg. This is a bag building game where you are pushing your luck. So I love push your luck. I love deck building / bag building. So you're adding these tokens to a bag, and then you're pulling them out simultaneously with other players and adding them to your potion that you're brewing for that round. You're adding these ingredients to your potion. And certain ingredients you don't want to pull out of that bag. They can push you towards busting, and certain ingredients just move you further and further up that track. And even give you more powerful benefits as you do that. Depends on the token, and the tokens, cleverly, each token has a variable definition, a variable meaning to it. And we did this, that's inspired what we did in Libertalia Winds of Galecrest, because each token in Quacks of Quedlinburg has a tile associated with it, usually a double-sided tile, and often multiple tiles. And so for any given game, you'll say, okay, this game, the purple tokens mean this, and you put that tile on the table. This is what they mean in this game. But it leads to so much variability in the game, because on any game, the combinations of those definitions mean very different things. We did that same thing in Libertalia Winds of Galecrest, where we have double-sided tiles that offer the definitions of the loot tokens in Libertalia. But I love that variability. And in Quacks, I also really, really love that even if you bust, which I do often in Quacks, that it doesn't feel all that bad for 2 reasons. One, if you don't bust, you get to buy stuff and you get points. If you bust, you only get to choose one of those things, but you still get one of those things. You either get points or you get to add stuff to your bag. Typically, early in the game, you add stuff to the bag. Late in the game, you might go for the points. In addition to that, though, there's a nice catch-up mechanism in the game using rat tails. So depending on how many points you have, you look at yourself compared to the leader in the game, and how many rat tails are between you and that leader gives you a little boost in your potion spiral at the beginning of the round. So there's a nice catch-up mechanism if you aren't doing well early in the game, if you're busting a lot. Makes you feel like you're in the game throughout the game, but it still gives an advantage to those players who aren't busting and who are playing more conservatively or just are better at not busting, which I think is important. So those 2 things, I think, balance out really, really well in Quacks. And overall, the game is just a lot of fun. I just have a lot of fun with Quacks. It feels different every time I play, and I'm excited to get to the table anytime I have the chance to do it. This is one that I might need to do a top 10 favorite things about Quacks video sometime. Although I need to play the new expansion, and I haven't played that yet. That's the Quacks of Quedlinburg at number 2. At number 1 is one of the newest games, but I have played it so much over the last 9 months. I think I started playing it in November, December of last year, and that is Ark Nova. I really, really love Ark Nova. Like several of the games on this list, I have done a video outlining my top 10 favorite things about Ark Nova, where I go into detail about the mechanisms in the game. The core of Arc Nova is that you are playing, or you are selecting an action card among your 5 action cards, and you're taking that action based on where it is in your action card row, 1 to 5. So if you're using the action in the 5th space, that is the most powerful space, and then you remove that card from your action row, you slide the row over those 5 cards, or the 4 cards, and you insert the 5th card that you just used in the number 1 slot. Super streamlined, super basic action selection system, but I like that it's distilled down to such a streamlined thing because the rest of the game has a lot going on. There are many different things that you can do, many different paths that you can take. You can focus on income. You can focus on getting people into your zoo and gaining income from them. Those are also points that's one track of points in the game. You can also focus on conservation, which is zoology conservation. And you can get more points that way, but they're harder points to get oftentimes. And this track links together. So it's a long victory point track where on one side of the track is conservation. The other side is the, I'm forgetting the right name right now. It's not income, the ticket sales. And when those 2 tracks collide, that triggers the end of the game. So really it's to your benefit to gain both of those points at different times, but maybe focus on one over the other. I love that. There's a little bit of worker placement in the game. There's a lot of there's a lot of engine building with the cards that you're deciding to play and the animals that you're deciding to play in your zoo. And you're also building up your zoo as you do so in a kind of a hex-shaped polyomino puzzle on your player mat. Again, there's a lot going on, but I love all these different puzzles and how they come together, all brought back to that core system, that core simple action selection system that was originally found in Civilization and New Dawn. But I think everything else that happens outside of the system is much more satisfying, I think, in Arc Nova than Civilization and New Dawn. I love Arc Nova. I really love it. And I don't need to knock Civilization New Dawn. I just really have connected with Arc Nova. And I don't have my copy right now because a friend is borrowing it. I'm hoping to get it back later this week. But I do own the game. I love the game. I'm happy to get to the table anytime that anyone wants to play. And yeah, it's my number 1 favorite game right now. That's my list. I would love to hear your thoughts on these games or your top 3, top 5, top 10 favorite games right now for you. Let me know what your list is and how you created your list. I'm curious to see how people create the list. Some people use Pub Meeple, which is a way of comparing, having games go head to head to see which games do better. There are other metrics. You can look at your Board Game Geek list and pick out, you can only look at the games that you've rated 9 or above and pick from those games, things like that. Let me know how you pick your list and what your favorite games are right now. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks.